Hello and welcome to Miss Hannah Loves Grammar. In this video we'll be considering the theme of parental love across the collection of AQA poems in the Love and Relationships cluster. But first of all, let's just consider what we really mean by parental love. Traditionally, it is simply the relationship between a mother or a father towards their child, but we see it in many different guises across the collection. So the poems that it directly affects are Before You Were Mine by Carol Anne Duffy, Follower by Seamus Heaney, Mother Any Distance by Simon Armitage, Walking Away by Cecil Day Lewis, and finally Eden Rock by Causley. So first up is Before You Were Mine by Carol Anne Duffy. So this really tells the story of how the speaker's mother had the best years of her life before her child was born. The first image we get of the glamorous mother before she had a child was the image that she was like Marilyn, the iconic actress from the 1950s, Marilyn Monroe. And her mother is compared to that actress, which makes her seem incredibly glamorous. The image of the high-heeled red shoes, complemented by the Marilyn image, signal of flirtation and romance and excitement. The speaker's really drawing attention to her mother's lively style in her youth. Perhaps Duffy is depicting the speaker as inspired here. It's almost as if, across this poem, our speaker is determined to make sense of their parental figure. Before they were a parent, they had this separate life that the child doesn't really know about and is simply looking at images to work out what they really were like. The next quote, "You reckon it's worth it," is our speaker trying to understand the decisions that their mum used to make when she was deciding and weighing up what to do on a night out before she came home. It suggests that her mum used to be quite wild, weighing up what kinds of consequences there might be. "You reckon" is direct address, as if this poem is in part a conversation with the parent, as if they're reliving a memory together. And then finally the title itself, Before You Were Mine. It could be interpreted as possessive in a romantic way upon first look. But when we dig beyond that initial glance, we realise this is truly about parental life before children. Mine, as that possessive pronoun shows us, is now that the parent is under the control of that child. And before, as a preposition, it's signalling that life was different. Duffy here is implying that parenting is restrictive and demands responsibility, and therefore parental love is in some way sacrificial. Follower by Seamus Heaney takes a different turn, and it shows a lot of mirroring of the father and the son. Our first quote is an expert. The father is described by our speaker as an expert, which suggests that the speaker, as the son, once admired his father. It's as if the father is on a pedestal, or even deeper than that. Maybe it's a tough act to follow your father if he's an expert. Heaney uses this image later when we see that the father is now weaker. It's used to juxtapose strength from weakness. Our next quote shows the father mapping the furrow exactly, and this is about ploughing the land. Our speaker is still able to recall how impressive his father was. The verb mapping, to me, shows precision and finesse, and the adverb exactly suggests that the speaker's father is experienced and skillful. He knows exactly what to do. If it wasn't clear enough to us, it confirms for the reader that the father was the best at his job. "He rode me on his back" is a really great nostalgic image of an innocent childhood. It seems positive. It shows the very best of times. If the father was amazing, it was as if he was invincible. Yeah, and if we fast forward to the very end of the poem, it says, "But today, it's my father who keeps stumbling." That juxtaposition is pretty damning in the final stanza, and we have to call into question our speaker. The verb stumbling here shows his weakness as a father and maybe heightens how frustrated our speaker is. Our question as readers is, to what extent does a child need to support their parent as they move into their elderly second childhood themselves? Next up is Armitage's Mother Any Distance. This tells of a particular moment in time. This child is weighing up freedom. They have moved into a new place and they're getting their mum to measure the place out with them. But it's a struggle between independence and still wanting that support from your parent. A poignant quote is anchor kite. They're two very juxtaposing images. An anchor could be the mother holding him in a really secure way, or could it be the mother holding him back? Equally, the kite is to me a symbol of freedom. Is the mother stopping him, though, from that freedom arriving? Another interpretation could be that the speaker wants to be more free than a kite, which is actually quite vulnerable in the sky and is still held by someone pulling it on a string. The image in the next quote of spacewalking is a nice parallel. I spacewalk. Perhaps the speaker here feels as though they are like an astronaut. It's a metaphor where the speaker feels vulnerable. It's as if they're floating without foundation and going nowhere. As we glide our way through this poem, by the final two lines, with the enjambment that we see, we feel this overflow of conflicting emotion. And our final phrase across the final two lines of the poem is endless sky to fall or to fly. Endless, by its very definition, is that there's a huge range of opportunities. And sky seems vast. But the idea of the verb to fall, well, that implies suffering and failure as a consequence of being independent. And flying, well, that implies soaring in your freedom and being liberated. This poem, if we take a step back from it, signals that parental love, if it's really grown up, takes a bit of push and pull. And for the parent and the child, it's a struggle between dependence and independence, where the child might want to be independent but might need the parent's help. The issue of dependency is definitely played out in Cecil Day Lewis's poem Walking Away. In this instance, satellite wrenched from its orbit. Wrenched is such an aggressive verb. It means to be forcefully taken off your course. And to me, this poem uses the semantic field of science in this specific image, astrophysics, to show how unnatural it is for this change to happen. Walking Away specifically tells of the moment when his child is going to school and he watches his child play football. And he's recalling that moment 18 years later because he knows there was a change. Here, our speaker presents love as difficult and challenging. Difficult, like you're being wrenched from your own orbit. The next image we get in the simile, like a winged seed loosened from its parent stem, is associating us with another set of semantic field of science terms, more biological this time. And in our case, the verb loosened is associated with this idea of being free. But it's interesting, in terms of biological language, the winged seed, it's got wings so it's able to fly further when it's free from the parent. But ultimately, separation from the parent and the child, as echoed in the title, is difficult for both of them. This is a point of no return for the parent stem or the seed, much like it is for the parent and the child. As we wrestle with this idea of what it looks like to allow someone, as the parent anyway, to be free, we get to the final line. Love is proved in the letting go. It's as if our speaker, who is the parental figure, is reassured by this sentiment an understanding of the decisions he has made to allow his son to walk away. The word proved, it's a deliberate action of showing your hope. And love here suggests that the parent may only learn of how deeply their child is part of them when that child is free and no longer in their charge. Letting go implies allowing the child to make their own decisions and that the parent has consciously made a choice. It's a shift across the poem from it not being a choice, it being very deliberate, being pulled from your orbit, to now it being your choice. Our final consideration is Eden Rock by Charles Causley. Seems interesting to me that his opening line is, "They are waiting for me." They are in the present tense. It's as if this moment, in nostalgic terms, is being acted out for the reader. And with so much vivid detail that we find, the setting seems ever more real. The verb waiting implies patience, dedication, and ultimately desire and want. It's that notion that we all have of our parents desperately wishing we were there. We wonder though, is Causley presenting the opening line in the poem like this to show and heighten to the absolute peak the way he seeks to understand his parents before he was born? Or is this something more challenging about their existence after death? The image in the second round of quote, "My father, 25, in the same suit." These are particular images, precise imagined images. I love the idea of the alliteration of same suit. He's thinking of the familiarity of, oh my goodness, I've seen my dad wear that suit many times. And the comfort of remembering his parents fondly is echoed across this. It's as if when we dream of our own parents, much like Carol Anne Duffy in Before You Were Mine, it's difficult to see them as young people before we were there. My father, 25, it's as if he's envisioning it for himself. As we move to the penultimate line of the poem, though, the setting itself becomes all the more ambiguous. As if part of speech, crossing is not as hard as you might think. This is in speech with speech marks. We wonder, is this about death? Is this about our speaker seeking to join his parents if they're dead? Or is it about them telling him to get closer as he's about to be born? But the fact there is speech suggests there's another voice that knows all. We wonder, is this a call from God or a parent ready to join them? The overall sentiment that sticks with me is that parents have a life before you, and maybe Causley's talking about the life they have after us. Ultimately, I think Causley is reminding readers that we have an obligation to make the most of every memory we have, as life is transient. Parental Love in all its guises seeks us to question, who is the parent in the poem? What is the speaker's role in relation to a parent? And how does that love look? Does it centre on dependency? Does it centre on loss? Does it centre on fragility? Or is it ultimately in the hands of a speaker who cares deeply for that parent? This is in the love and relationships cluster for a reason. The ultimate key with this question would be, how do you see that love in the relationship? Why not subscribe to Miss Hannah Loves Grammar?